Well, it's interesting. You and I saw this in the same screening
We did.
on Tuesday of this week, and I remember very clearly that when First Guardians came out, I was off the week that it came out because it came out in the summer, I think it must have been, and I went to the cinema to go and see it, knowing nothing about it except for the fact that the poster looked terrible. And as Chris Pratt said in that interview, there had been a sort of whiff in advance that somehow this was going to be a flop. And I remember being really knocked out by how funny, how funky it was, how really entertaining. People afterwards started making, references to it having that same kind of elan as the early stuff from Star Wars. It had real charm. It had real sort of postmodern, and part of it was the surprise. Part of it was just how little one expected it to be that good. So inevitably, when you come to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the element of surprise has been lost. And I think it is absolutely true that is a stumbling block. You're never going to get that thing again that you got with the first one, which was, wow, this is just great. And I had no idea how great it was going to be. That said, once you accept that you have lost that element of surprise to some extent, the question is, does it still manage to earn its keep? Does it still manage to be charming? Does it still manage to be entertaining? And the answer is largely yes. I don't think it's got the knockout punch that the first one had, and I do think that it suffers from the standard issue problem, which is that as it gets toward the third act of the narrative, we end up having too many characters, too many explosions, too many sort of action scenes, and to be honest with you, not quite enough plot. But without giving anything away, it was interesting. Chris Pratt says there it's actually, it's a film about family, and it's, as the series is, and that's a theme which is flagged up very clearly, and that's sort of the heart of it. It is to do with family, finding your family. Have you already found your family? And then during the course of that, what you get is all that kind of retro celluloid jukebox, in space stuff that made the first one so charming. I mean, you talk there about Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. We also get Southern Nights and My Sweet Lord, and as you said, Cat Stevens. And I think all that retro interstellar jukebox stuff works very well. There's a scene right at the beginning which plays out against Mr. Blue Sky, which the joke is that there's all this action going on in the background, but there's something cute and poppy and funny going on in the foreground. And in a way, that's kind of like a metaphor for the whole movie. It's almost like all the stuff that's actually going on with the plot and the machinations are kind of secondary to the fact that there is something charming and funny and cute about the way in which the music is used. It's also evident that everyone involved in it is having a fine time. I mean, not just, Kurt Russell, who you talked about in that interview, but the cast are clearly enjoying themselves. And
and often you've got a rule about that.
Well, my rule generally is that if the more people enjoy themselves making a movie, the less the audience will enjoy watching it. But the fact of the matter is, they are charming and funny because the characters are charming and funny, and that sort of interplay between him and Rocket and albeit fleeting, the gags about Howard the Duck and David Hasselhoff and Pac-Man and Cheers, and all that stuff does raise a wry smile. What it probably doesn't do is add up to much more than that. I mean, visually the thing is very, very arresting. At times it looks like an animated cover of a Yes album, and there's always sort of plenty of stuff to watch, and every sort of minute or so there's a gag which is quite funny. What I did notice, however, is that sense of sort of charm and wonderment is greatest at the early on in the film, and it sort of loses its way as the film feels that it needs to become bigger, more weighty, more important, and to start dealing and wrestling with the underlying narrative themes. So overall, having really gone in slightly worried because thinking, they got away with it once and it was really funny and it was really smart. Are they going to be able to pull it off a second time? The answer is broadly yes, they have. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I think that anyone going along who's already sort of got a lot invested in Guardians, I mean, it's funny, you were talking there about, if somebody hasn't seen Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's kind of hard now to imagine that would be the case because the thing has been so widely seen.
I hadn't seen it, so...
You hadn't seen it before you saw 2 at all?
Nope.
Oh, okay, fine. That would be a very different experience in that case.
Yes, it was. It felt a little bit like, when you're the designated driver and you turn up at a party and everyone has been drinking solidly since 5.
Okay.
I did feel as though I should I felt as though I was joining halfway through.
Okay, fine. All right. So did you find that sort of slightly annoying? Did you find it like it was a series of in-jokes that you hadn't been invited into?
Well, yes, but then it is the clue is volume 2.
Volume 2, yeah.
So the suggestion is maybe you should go and see number 1 before you see number 2.
And it's also true that the sort of the jokes that it's making, are jokes that I like. I mean, the fact is, I give extra brownie points to anything that makes a positive joke about Mary Poppins.
Yes.
And that, I was sitting behind you, and when the Mary Poppins joke happened, I could feel you going, "Oh, well, that's him sold."
And I could hear you being sold.
Being sold, yeah, exactly. However, I am aware of the fact that it isn't as coherent and as cohesive as the original was. And what it doesn't have is that absolute, jumping out of the box surprise. Hey, look how good this film is. What it does have is a sort of a holding pattern sense of goodwill. And I happen to like those jokes. So for me, it's shambolic, but it worked anyway.
Yes, and Brandy, by Looking Glass, is claimed to be the universe's
greatest
piece of
There is in-depth discussion of exactly what Brandy means.